Something clicked for me a few seasons back that completely changed how I garden. And it wasn't a new tool or a special fertilizer or anything I bought. It was just paying attention to what I was planting next to what. I'd been fighting aphids on my tomatoes for 3 years straight. Same problem, same spot, every single year. I tried soap sprays. I tried neem oil. I even tried one of those sticky trap things that ended up catching more of my hair than any actual insects. Nothing really fixed it. It just slowed things down a little. Then one summer, kind of by accident, I had some basil seedlings I didn't have a good spot for, so I stuck them right in between my tomato plants, just to get them in the ground. That was it. No plan. No strategy. That was probably the best unplanned thing I've ever done in a garden. The aphid pressure that summer was noticeably lighter. Not completely gone, I want to be honest with you about that, but genuinely lighter. And it got me curious enough to start paying attention to which plants seemed to help each other and which ones didn't. What I found is that this has a name: companion planting. And it's been around for a long time, way longer than any of the chemical sprays we've come to rely on. That principle, plants protecting and supporting each other, is what today's video is about. We're going to go through 15 companion plants that are genuinely useful for pest control in American gardens. Not 15 plants I pulled off a list somewhere. 15 that I've either grown myself or that have enough consistent evidence behind them that I feel comfortable recommending them. And where it matters, I'll tell you which USDA zones they work in, because what grows well in Georgia isn't always what grows well in Minnesota. And I'd rather be honest about that than give you advice that doesn't apply to where you actually live. If this is the kind of content that's useful to you, practical, no fluff, just real gardening, then subscribing would mean a lot. It helps this channel grow and tells me to keep making more of it. All right, let's get into it. The first thing worth understanding before we get to the plant list is why this works at all. Because if you understand the reason, you'll be able to make better decisions in your own garden, not just follow a list. Most pest insects find their target plants by smell. They're not flying around randomly landing on things. They're navigating. They pick up on the specific volatile compounds that their preferred host plants release, and they follow that scent to the source. It's actually a pretty sophisticated system, just not one that works in your favor when you're trying to grow tomatoes. Companion planting disrupts that navigation. You put a strongly scented plant right next to the thing you're trying to protect, and suddenly the signal gets muddied. The pest can't isolate the smell it's looking for. Some of them give up and move on. Some of them get confused long enough that your plants get through the season without serious damage. Other companion plants work differently. Some release compounds through their roots that actually change the soil environment in ways pests don't like. French marigolds do this with nematodes. We'll get to that. And some companions work by attracting the insects that eat the bad insects. Lacewings, hoverflies, parasitic wasps. These are the ones you want hanging around. A lot of flowering herbs bring them in. So, it's not magic. It's not folk wisdom that doesn't hold up. There's real biology behind it. And when you understand that, you stop thinking of companion planting as this vague idea and start thinking of it as an actual tool. Okay, plants. Number 1, basil. We might as well start here, since it's what got me paying attention in the first place. Basil repels aphids, whiteflies, and the moths that eventually become tomato hornworms. The way it works is through the volatile oils in its leaves. Linalool and estragol are the main ones. Those compounds don't just smell pleasant to us. To a lot of insects, they're genuinely disorienting. Plant it near tomatoes and peppers. Those are its best companions, and plant it close, within about 12 to 18 inches. I used to stick basil at the ends of rows like a little decorative border, and it didn't do much from there. When I moved it in between, the tomato plants, that's when I noticed a difference. In terms of zones, basil is a warm season annual everywhere except zones 10 and 11, where it can behave more like a perennial. For everyone else in the continental US, you're starting it after your last frost date and pulling it before the first fall frost. It doesn't tolerate cold at all. Even a light frost will blacken the leaves overnight. Basil and tomatoes like similar conditions: full sun, consistent moisture, warm soil. So they're not competing against each other. They're genuinely compatible in almost every way, which is part of why that pairing has been around so long. Number 2, mint is one of the most effective pest-repelling plants you can grow. It's also one of the most aggressive spreaders in the garden, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't lead with that. It drives away ants, aphids, cabbage moths, and flea beetles. The menthol compounds in its leaves are strong enough to mask the scent of nearby plants very effectively. If you're growing brassicas, cabbage, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, mint is a really good companion for that family specifically, because cabbage moths are persistent and hard to deal with otherwise. But here's the non-negotiable rule with mint. Grow it in a container. Always. Even if you think you'll manage it, even if you've heard of people growing it in the ground without problems, just pot it. Sink the pot into the soil if you want it to look like it's in the bed. That way the roots can't escape. I skipped this step once, and mint took over about a third of a raised bed in a single season. It's vigorous in a way that sounds like an exaggeration until you experience it. Mint is perennial in zones 3 through 8. In warmer zones, it can get almost shrubby if it's happy. A light trim every few weeks keeps it productive and stops it from getting woody. Number 3, rosemary is one I'd recommend to anyone who has a sunny, relatively dry spot in their garden and wants something that works hard without asking for much in return. It repels carrot flies, bean beetles, and slugs. That sharp, piney scent it has, the same one that makes it so good in a kitchen, is exactly what makes it effective as a companion. Slugs especially seem to avoid it. And if you've ever dealt with slug damage on young seedlings, you know how quickly they can ruin a planting. It works well near carrots, beans, and brassicas. I've had good results planting it along the edges of raised beds as a kind of low border. It doesn't spread aggressively. It doesn't need much water. It just sits there, doing its job quietly. Zone-wise, rosemary is perennial in zones 7 through 10. If you're in zones 5 or 6, you can grow it as an annual or bring a container plant inside for the winter. In zone 4 and below, it's really not worth trying to overwinter it outdoors. Just treat it as an annual and replant each spring. One small tip: don't overwater rosemary. It actually does better with a little drought stress. And interestingly, mild stress tends to increase the concentration of oils in the leaves, which makes it more aromatic and more effective as a pest deterrent. So neglecting it slightly is, in this case, the right call. Number 4, lavender gets a lot of attention for how it looks and smells, and rightfully so, but it doesn't get nearly enough credit for what it actually does in a garden ecosystem. It repels moths, fleas, and whiteflies. It keeps aphids away from nearby roses, and if you grow roses, you probably know aphids treat them like a buffet from late spring onward. Planting lavender at the base of rose bushes or along the same bed is one of the more reliable ways to reduce that pressure without spraying anything. At the same time, lavender attracts bees and butterflies in serious numbers. So you're not just repelling things you don't want, you're actively bringing in the pollinators your fruiting plants depend on. That dual function is what makes it such a useful addition to almost any setup. English lavender is the hardiest, perennial in zones 5 through 8. French and Spanish varieties do better in zones 7 through 9, but are less cold tolerant. If you're in the upper Midwest or New England, and you want lavender that actually comes back, stick with English varieties like Hidcote or Munstead. Here's a question I'm genuinely curious about, and I'd love to see this in the comments. Which of these first 4 have you already got growing? And have you noticed any difference in pest pressure near them? I ask because I always learn something from what other people are actually seeing in their own gardens. Different climates, different results. It's worth comparing notes. We've got 11 more plants to cover, so let's keep moving. Now we're moving into a slightly different category. These next plants still use scent in some cases, but a few of them work through root chemistry, physical trapping, or by pulling in the insects that do your pest control for you. It's a broader toolkit, and honestly, this middle section is where companion planting gets more interesting. Let's keep going. Number 5. Chives don't get talked about nearly enough in companion planting conversations, and I think it's because they look so unassuming. They're just these thin little green stalks. Nothing about them screams pest control, but they work, and they work consistently. Chives belong to the allium family, same as garlic and onion, and they produce mild sulfur compounds through their roots and leaves. Those compounds repel aphids, Japanese beetles, and carrot flies. They're not as potent as garlic, which we'll get to, but they have an advantage garlic doesn't. They come back every single year without you doing anything, and they flower in a way that actively attracts pollinators. That flowering matters. When chives bloom, those small purple globe-shaped flowers in late spring, the flowers are pulling in bees and beneficial insects at the same time. The plant is pushing away the ones you don't want. Both things happening at once. Plant them near roses, carrots, and tomatoes. I've had a clump of chives at the corner of my main vegetable bed for about 4 years now. I don't do anything to them. They die back in fall, come back in spring, and every year the aphid pressure near that corner is noticeably lighter than the other end of the bed. They're perennial in zones 3 through 9, pretty much the whole continental US, and they'll grow in a container just as happily as in the ground if space is an issue. One practical note: don't plant them too deep. They like to sit fairly shallow in the soil, and they prefer full sun. Give them that, and they'll genuinely take care of themselves. Number 6. Garlic. If chives are the quiet, reliable option, garlic is the heavy hitter. It repels aphids, spider mites, Japanese beetles, and root maggots. The compounds responsible, primarily allicin, are produced when the plant tissue is disturbed, but there's also a passive release happening through the roots and leaves throughout the growing season. It's not just when you crush a clove in your kitchen. The living plant is constantly putting something into its immediate environment that a lot of insects find deeply unpleasant. I treat garlic less like a crop I'm growing and more like a tool I'm deploying around the garden. I tuck cloves near tomatoes, peppers, roses, and fruit trees, and the soil benefit is real too. Garlic has mild antifungal properties that can reduce certain soil-borne diseases just by being present. You're getting pest repellent and a degree of disease suppression from the same plant. The timing is a little different from most vegetables. Garlic wants to go in the ground in fall, typically October or November, depending on your zone, so it can go through a cold period before sending up growth in spring. That cold exposure is what triggers proper bulb development. If you plant it in spring, you'll get something, but the bulbs will be small and disappointing. It's grown in all zones as an annual crop, though it overwinters in the ground in zones 5 and above without much protection. In zones 3 and 4, you might want a layer of mulch over the bed to protect it through the coldest months. If you miss the fall planting window, don't write off the season entirely. You can push individual cloves into the soil near established plants in early spring and get some benefit from the young growth even if the bulbs don't fully develop. It's not ideal, but it's not nothing either. Number 7. Marigolds, French variety. Specifically, this is probably the most well-known companion plant on the entire list, and I debated including it for that reason. But it earns its place. The reputation is justified. French marigolds, Tagetes patula, the smaller bushy ones, do something that most plants on this list don't. They work underground. Their roots release a compound called alpha-terthienol, which is toxic to nematodes. Nematodes are microscopic worms that live in the soil and attack plant roots. They're invisible, they're common, and they can devastate a vegetable bed without you ever seeing the actual culprit. You just notice your plant struggling for no obvious reason. A border of French marigolds planted for a full season and then tilled into the soil can meaningfully reduce nematode populations in that area. It's not instant, it builds over a growing season, but it's real, and it's documented. Above ground, marigolds repel aphids, whiteflies, and tomato hornworm moths through their scent, and they act as a minor trap crop for spider mites, drawing them away from more valuable plants. Plant them as a border around tomatoes, squash, peppers, and cucumbers. Full border, not just a corner. The root effect needs coverage to work properly. They're annuals in all zones, but self-seed reliably in zones 9 through 11. Everywhere else, you're starting fresh each year, which is fine. They're cheap and fast-growing. One thing I'd push back on slightly, compared to what you might read elsewhere, African marigolds, the tall ones, are beautiful but noticeably less effective for nematode control than the French variety. If pest suppression is your goal, check the label before you buy. Tagetes patula is what you want. Number 8. Nasturtiums. Nasturtiums require a small mindset shift to appreciate fully because the way they work is counterintuitive. They attract pests. Deliberately, that's the point. Aphids, whiteflies, and caterpillars are strongly drawn to nasturtiums, more drawn to them, in many cases, than to your vegetables. So you plant nasturtiums nearby. The pests pile onto them instead of your main crops, and your vegetables stay cleaner. It's called a trap crop strategy, and nasturtiums are one of the best plants for it. I remember the first time someone explained this to me, and I thought it sounded backwards. Why would I plant something that attracts the exact bugs I'm trying to get rid of? But the logic holds. A pest that's feeding on a nasturtium leaf is not feeding on your cucumber. You're redirecting the problem, not eliminating it. But redirection is often enough. Plant them at the perimeter of your beds, or between rows of cucumbers, beans, squash, and brassicas, upwind of your main crops if you can manage it, so pests encounter them first. They also happen to be entirely edible. Leaves, flowers, and seeds all have a peppery flavor that works well in salads. So while they're absorbing your aphid problem, they're also giving you something for the kitchen. That's a reasonable trade. Annual in all zones. They prefer cooler weather and will slow down or bolt in peak summer heat, so in warmer climates, zones 8 and above, they do their best work in spring and fall, rather than midsummer. Number 9. Petunias. Petunias are one of those plants that most people buy for window boxes and hanging baskets without realizing they have any practical function in a vegetable garden. They do. They repel tomato hornworms, aphids, squash bugs, and asparagus beetles. Squash bugs specifically are worth highlighting. They're genuinely difficult to control without chemicals, and there aren't many companion plants that have a meaningful effect on them. Petunias are one of the few. They work through their sticky, slightly resinous leaves and stems, which physically trap smaller insects, and through a scent that a number of pest species find off-putting. It's not the strongest repellent on this list, but it's consistent, and petunias are easy to grow and maintain. Plant them near tomatoes, peppers, squash, and basil. They like full sun and regular watering, though they're somewhat drought-tolerant once established. The wave or spreading varieties give you better ground-level coverage than the upright types, useful if you're trying to create coverage between rows. They're perennial in zones 10 and 11, annual everywhere else. They bloom for a long time through the growing season, which means they're working the whole time your vegetables are in the ground. One honest note here, petunias alone won't solve a serious squash bug infestation. If you already have a heavy population in your garden, companion planting is a prevention and reduction strategy, not a cure. Manage the existing problem first, then use petunias to keep pressure lower going forward. That's true of most companion plants, actually. They work better as part of a system than as a single fix. Number 10. Calendula. Calendula is one I think deserves more attention than it typically gets, even in companion planting circles. It does two things simultaneously. First, it has sticky resin on its stems and flowers that physically traps aphids and whiteflies. They land on it and don't leave. Second, the bright orange and yellow blooms are genuinely attractive to hoverflies, lacewings, and ladybugs, all of which feed on aphids and other soft-bodied pests. So it's trapping some pests directly and pulling in predators to handle the rest. That combination, physical trap plus predator attraction, is unusual. Most companion plants do one or the other. Calendula does both. Plant it near lettuce, spinach, beans, and tomatoes. It's a cool season annual, which means it does its best work in spring and fall in most climates. In zones 9 through 11, It can flower through a mild winter. In the middle of summer, in warmer areas, it tends to struggle. So if you're in the south or southwest, plan your calendula plantings around your cooler growing windows. Deadhead it regularly. This keeps it blooming, and more blooms means more sticky surface area and more beneficial insect activity. If you let it go to seed without deadheading, it'll slow down significantly, and you'll lose most of the benefit. It's also edible. The petals are mild and slightly peppery, and they make a nice addition to salads or as a garnish. I mention this partly because I think it helps people commit to growing plants they might otherwise overlook. If it's giving you something for the kitchen on top of doing pest control, it's easier to make room for it. So that's plants 5 through 10. Chives, garlic, French marigolds, nasturtiums, petunias, and calendula. What I want you to notice is that these aren't all doing the same thing. Garlic and chives work through chemistry. Marigolds work underground. Nasturtiums redirect pest pressure. Petunias and calendula work through physical and scent-based deterrents. And calendula pulls in the insects that do the real cleanup work. That variety is what makes a companion planting setup more effective than any single plant could be on its own. You're building something that works on multiple levels at once, in the soil, above the soil, through scent, through attraction. Pests don't tend to overwhelm a system like that the way they overwhelm a monoculture. One thing I'd encourage you to think about as we go through this, you don't need to implement all of it at once. Pick 2 or 3 pairings that match the crops you're already growing and start there. Pay attention to what you see over the season. That's genuinely how you learn what works in your specific garden, in your specific climate. No video or article can fully substitute for your own observation. All right, 5 more plants to go in number 11. Borage is one of those plants that experienced gardeners tend to quietly rely on, while newer gardeners walk right past it at the nursery. It doesn't look particularly impressive when it's young, a bit rough and hairy, spreads low to the ground before it takes off. But give it a few weeks, and it becomes something genuinely beautiful. Star-shaped blue flowers, bees absolutely covering it from morning to afternoon. Those flowers are the point. Borage is one of the best pollinator attractors you can grow, and that matters for pest control in a way that isn't always obvious. When you have a healthy population of bees and beneficial wasps in your garden, you have a garden that's also attracting predatory insects, lacewings, parasitic wasps, hoverflies that feed on the pests you're trying to get rid of. Borage creates the conditions that make that happen. Beyond the pollinator effect, borage specifically repels tomato hornworms and cabbage worms. Both are frustrating pests that can do serious damage quickly and are hard to spot until the damage is already done. Having borage nearby doesn't guarantee you'll never see them, but it reduces the pressure meaningfully. Plant it near tomatoes, strawberries, squash, and cabbage. Those are its strongest companion relationships. I'd also suggest planting it somewhere you're happy to let it do its own thing, because borage self-seeds prolifically. Once you grow it, it tends to come back in the general area year after year without you doing anything. You pull the ones you don't want and leave the ones you do. It naturalizes in a way that feels almost effortless after the first season. It grows as an annual in all zones, but reliably self-seeds in zones 5 through 10. In warmer climates, it can get quite large. 4 feet across isn't unusual in a good spot. Give it room. And the flowers are edible. Mild, faintly cucumber-flavored. They're commonly used as a garnish or frozen into ice cubes. I mention this every time I bring up borage, because I think it's the detail that gets people to actually plant it. Once you know the flowers are edible and beautiful and covered in bees all summer, it becomes an easy yes. Number 12. Dill is a plant with a split personality, and understanding that is the key to using it well. When it's young, in its feathery, leafy stage, dill repels spider mites and aphids. The scent is strong enough to provide some deterrence to those pests around nearby plants. So far, straightforward. But when dill matures and starts to flower, something shifts. The flowers, those flat umbrella-shaped clusters called umbels, become incredibly attractive to beneficial insects. Hoverflies, lacewings, braconid wasps. These are the insects whose larvae feed on aphids and caterpillars. A patch of flowering dill in a vegetable garden is essentially a recruitment station for your natural pest control team. So the same plant goes from repelling bad insects when young to attracting the predators of bad insects when mature. If you stagger your dill plantings, put some in early, and let it mature while starting fresh seedlings nearby, you can have both functions running at the same time throughout the season. Plant it near cabbage, cucumbers, and lettuce. Those are its best companions. 2 things to keep in mind: keep it away from carrots, because dill and carrots can cross-pollinate and affect flavor if you're saving seed, and keep mature dill away from tomatoes. There's reasonable evidence that mature dill can inhibit tomato growth. Young dill near tomatoes is generally fine. It's the mature flowering plant you want to keep some distance from. It's a cool season annual that tolerates light frost. In hot climates, it bolts quickly in summer, so in zones 8 and above, plan for spring and fall plantings rather than trying to push it through midsummer heat. Number 13. Cilantro. Most people think of cilantro purely as a culinary herb, and understandably so. It's one of the most widely used herbs in American cooking, but it does real work in a garden as a companion plant, particularly once it bolts. Young cilantro repels spider mites, aphids, and potato beetles. The scent is strong and unfamiliar to a lot of pest insects, which causes that same navigation disruption we talked about at the start of the video. It's not as potent as garlic or rosemary in that regard, but it's consistent. When cilantro bolts, which it does quickly, especially in warm weather, and goes to flower, it attracts parasitic wasps and tachinid flies. These are small insects most gardeners never notice, but they're genuinely important. Parasitic wasps lay their eggs inside or on caterpillars and beetle larvae, which kills the pest. Tachinid flies do something similar. They're not dramatic or visible, but they're working through your garden, doing cleanup in ways you mostly only notice by the absence of damage. The practical move with cilantro is to stop fighting the bolt. A lot of gardeners get frustrated when cilantro bolts because it means the leaves become less useful for cooking. But if you shift your thinking and treat bolted cilantro as a beneficial insect station rather than a failed crop, you start seeing it differently. Let it flower, leave it standing. Then let it go to seed, coriander seed, which is its own useful kitchen ingredient, and it'll self-seed into the following season in most climates. Plant it near peppers, potatoes, and spinach. Cool season annual in all zones. In zones 7 and above, it can overwinter as a rosette if planted in fall, giving you an early spring plant that bolts and flowers before the heat sets in, which is actually ideal timing for beneficial insect attraction. Number 14. Tansy is genuinely old, not just old-fashioned, old. It was used as a pest deterrent and medicinal plant in European gardens for centuries, and colonial American gardeners brought it with them and planted it around doorways, pantries, and outbuildings specifically to keep insects out. Somewhere along the way, it fell out of common use in modern gardens, which is a shame, because it's one of the more effective multi-pest repellents on this list. It drives away ants, flies, moths, cucumber beetles, squash bugs, and Japanese beetles. That's a broad spectrum of pest repellents for a single plant. The active compounds are in its leaves and stems, strong, bitter-smelling oils that a wide range of insects find intolerable. You'll notice it immediately when you brush against it. It smells sharp and medicinal in a way that's hard to describe, but instantly recognizable once you know it. Plant it near compost bins, along garden borders, and near fruit trees. It's particularly effective as a border plant around the perimeter of a garden space because its repellent effect radiates outward. Ants especially. If you have ant problems around fruit trees or near your vegetable beds, tansy along the perimeter is one of the more reliable deterrents I know of. 2 honest warnings. First, tansy spreads aggressively through rhizomes underground. Plant it in a contained area or be prepared to manage it firmly each season. A buried root barrier, similar to what you'd use for mint, helps. Second, Tansy is toxic if consumed in any significant quantity. It's not a culinary herb and shouldn't be treated as one. It's a companion plant and a border plant. Keep it away from areas where children or animals might graze on it. Perennial in zones 4 through 8. It's a tough plant that handles poor soil and doesn't need much water once established. In fact, it tends to spread more aggressively in rich, moist soil, so lean toward a drier, less fertile spot if you can manage it. It won't win any beauty contests in the way borage or calendula will. But if you have serious pressure from Japanese beetles, squash bugs, or cucumber beetles, and you've tried other things without much success, tansy is worth giving a corner of the garden. You'll notice the difference. Number 15, parsley last on the list, and in some ways the most understated. Parsley is a plant almost every gardener grows, usually tucked near the kitchen door for easy access. Most people harvest it regularly and never let it do anything else. That's a missed opportunity. When parsley flowers, which it does in its second year, since it's a biennial, the flowers are small, flat, and yellow-green. Not showy, easy to overlook, but they're remarkably effective at attracting hoverflies and parasitic wasps, more so than a lot of more visually impressive flowers. The flower structure is shallow and open, which makes the nectar accessible to small beneficial insects that can't reach it in deeper flowers. It's genuinely one of the better plants for supporting that predator insect population. The move most gardeners don't make is simply letting some parsley complete its full life cycle. You plant it, harvest from it through the first season, and then in spring of the second year, you let it send up its flower stalks and bloom. You'll see more small bees, hoverflies, and tiny wasps around those flowers than almost anywhere else in the garden. And those insects are spending time in your garden, which means they're also controlling your aphid population while they're there. Plant it near tomatoes, asparagus, and roses. Keep it away from lettuce. They're not a good pairing. It's a biennial in zones 4 through 9, meaning it lives for 2 years and flowers in the second. In zones 10 and above, it sometimes behaves more like an annual, bolting and dying in its first year due to heat. In cooler climates, the 2-year life cycle plays out reliably. The simple ask is just this. Next time a parsley plant overwinters in your garden or comes back in spring, don't pull it. Let it flower. Give it that second year. You probably won't see dramatic, obvious results. Beneficial insect activity is subtle, but over the course of a season, the cumulative effect on pest pressure is real. So that's all 15. Basil, mint, rosemary, and lavender. In part 1. The aromatic herbs that work through scent disruption. Chives, garlic, marigolds, nasturtiums, petunias, and calendula in part 2. Working through root chemistry, physical trapping, and redirecting pest pressure. And now, borage, dill, cilantro, tansy, and parsley. Building the predator insect population, deterring the harder pests, and doing the kind of quiet, long-term work that makes a garden healthier. Season after season, companion planting isn't a switch you flip. It's not something you set up in one afternoon and then stop thinking about. It's a direction you move in, gradually, over multiple seasons, and the garden gets better incrementally as you go. You try a pairing, you pay attention, you notice what changes. Some things work better than you expected. Some things don't do much in your specific conditions. You adjust. That process of paying attention is, honestly, most of what good gardening is. The companion planting piece is just a framework for thinking about your garden as a system rather than a collection of individual plants. If I were starting from scratch with all of this tomorrow, here's what I'd actually do. I'd pick the 3 crops I care most about, let's say tomatoes, cucumbers, and brassicas, and I'd build one solid companion combination around each one. Basil and marigolds with the tomatoes, nasturtiums and dill near the cucumbers, mint in a pot, and sage along the border near the brassicas. That's it for the first season. 6 plants, 3 pairings. Simple enough to actually follow through on and specific enough to see results. Then at the end of the season, I'd look at what changed. Where did I see fewer pests? Where did I still have problems? And I'd let that guide what I add or adjust the following year. That's the whole method. Nothing more complicated than that. If you've watched this far and you're thinking about where to start, Drop it in the comments. Tell me which crop is giving you the most pest trouble, and I'll tell you which pairing from this list I'd try first. I'm not just saying that to generate comments. I find those questions genuinely useful because they tell me what to cover next. And if this kind of content is useful to you, practical, specific, no filler, then subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss what's coming. Next video is going to be about building real soil health without buying a single bag of fertilizer, kitchen scraps, garden waste, and a little patience. It's one of those topics that sounds basic until you get into the details, and then it gets interesting fast. Thanks for spending this time here. Go plant something. I'll see you in the next one.